One of the stranger frustrations of doing a chronology is that sometimes history just doesn't line up quite right. There's about 2 more weeks of Famidaily episodes before we reach the end of 1987, and here's Rockman, the clearest delineation of the early days of the Famicom and its peak. The dividing line between what was and what will be. Rockman says you can't make games like Dragon Scroll anymore. This is how you make a proper Famicom game. It would have been the perfect ending to 1987. But here it is, 2 weeks early, and those 2 weeks have plenty of games that trudge along in the old model. Can't be helped, I suppose. Anybody who finds this video has no need of introduction to Rockman. It's the start of a game franchise that will dominate for the next 20 years. It's the flagship game series on the Famicom. Rockman is going to be Capcom's holiday release, with one weird exception, until the end of the Famicom's life. I've heard people say that Rockman wasn't popular immediately, but I've recently come across an industry source that said that Rockman was one of the 3 biggest hits of the holiday 1987 season. Either way, it got a sequel, and Rockman stayed in print for the Famicom's lifespan. There's ads for Rockman 6 that tell people to pick up the rest of the series. The counterpoint to this is Rockman is a fairly expensive game to pick up. I actually found it more difficult to get the original than to get Rockman 6. Okay, let's talk about the gameplay for everyone's favorite super fighting robot. When you start Rockman, you're given your choice of 6 stages, each defined by the boss at the end of it. Bosses are formerly helpful robots that have been corrupted by Dr. Wily to go crazy. And they are Gutsman, Cutman, Elecman, Iceman, Fireman, and Bombman. You can do the stages in any order, but there are advantages to taking a specific path through them. Defeating one of these first 6 bosses gets you their weapon. Their weapons only have a limited number of shots though, and you have to collect weapon energy to recharge them. But you don't want to just sit on them. There's plenty of enemies and stage hazards that are mitigated by using a boss weapon. The Rolling Cutter's circular path, for example, is perfect for getting enemies that your shots can't reach. Gutman's super arm is used to remove pieces of the stage, which will open new paths. The spread of Elecman's Thunder Beam lets you take out enemies directly below you, and have an easier time hitting enemies in front of you. And Iceman's Ice Slasher freezes some obstacles in place. The biggest feature of Rockman is that each of those bosses is vulnerable to one of the other's weapons. Fireman has a tough pattern to deal with, but with Iceman's beam you can beat him before he drains away your life. Rockman's different from later games in the series. Many of the boss weaknesses here will take them out in 3 hits. That's nice, since while the patterns are simple, they also have pretty narrow ranges to avoid them. One thing about that boss order, it always helps to do Gutsman before you get to Elecman, because hidden on Elecman's stage is a special weapon that can only be accessed with Gutsman's weapon. The magnet beam creates platforms when you fire it, and you will need it to complete the game. With all 6 bosses defeated, Dr. Wily appears, and you have to head through stages that represent his castle. That first Wily stage has one of the most infamous bosses on the Famicom, the Yellow Devil. It zooms in to attack you in pieces, and you have to dodge all of these flying chunks before it reveals its weakness for just 1 moment, and then it repeats the process. The difficulty in dodging, and the damage that you take from him, lead most people to use a bug to defeat the Yellow Devil. You can pause the game as the Elec beam is passing over a spot, and if you catch it on a damage frame, it'll take continuous damage for a few seconds. Then die when you unpause it. Of course, the alternative is you could be like me and do this on the first try with no pausing. That takes me to the first stage where you refight bosses. This becomes a staple of the series later on, but unlike those later games, in Mega Man 1 the order is forced upon you, and the first two refights take place in the context of a stage. After that comes what I think is the actual hardest boss in the game. The Copy Mega Man can hit you pretty hard, and I always found the randomness in his movement and attacks to be a little bit troubling. Of course, you could just fireball him. After that comes this swim down a pipe, and this bubble boss where the trick is to just use your regular gun for the first 4 of them that emerge, then switch to the super arm and throw bricks at them. And then on the final stage, you face the remaining 4 bosses and Dr. Wily himself. Rockman is a pretty difficult game, but I've always found that Wily machine at the end to be pretty easy. Once Dr. Wily is begging for forgiveness, the end credits roll and you're fighting for everlasting peace. And I managed to do all of that in the hour that I usually give myself to record footage. I gotta tell you, it was really hard not to turn this video into a walkthrough of the entire game. There's so many little things to discuss. The disappearing, reappearing blocks that become a staple of the series. The infamous Gutsman platforms. The way that the platforming isn't quite right, and so you can't really jump when there's an overhang above you. Everyone's favorite instant death spikes. How you really do need to get a better weapon like the rolling cutter early on. And of course, the Mega Man 1 scoring system. Of all the things that are off in the original Rockman, the one that disappoints me the most is the music. I feel like Elecman has the only really strong stage music in this one. It's not that the rest are bad, it's that the music gets to be so good in the upcoming games. Rockman still feels like it has a little bit of that old Famicom styling. The way that stage segments have a tendency to repeat, but with different enemy patterns. Or how the platforming feels like randomly arranged blocks rather than an environment. And the low number of enemies in the game feels very limiting. Though I wouldn't have minded if they cut these guys out. In a way, Rockman feels half-finished. The 4 bosses jammed on top of each other at the last stage, and the way that Gutsman's stage feels more fully developed than, say, Bomb Man's, it feels like they just ran out of time. All that said, Rockman is still the best action game we've seen on the Famicom since, Super Mario Bros., I guess. It's not perfect, but it mainly suffers in comparison to what's going to come. With Rockman, we have entered the era of the Famicom greats, the all-time classics, the games that define our memories of what 8-bit gaming was. As the harbinger of that new age, I can forgive the missteps.